The monuments of the past, from Rome's shattered forum to the silted palaces of the Han, stand as monuments not just to ambition, but to failure. We, the inheritors of history, often look for the climactic battle, the sudden invasion that brought these titans down. We imagine a thunderbolt from the outside, but the history of collapse teaches us a far more insidious and terrifying lesson, that the fatal wound is rarely external. It is inflicted slowly, painlessly, and repeatedly by the hand of the empire itself. Long before the invaders arrive, the true strength of the kingdom, its political will and its social contract, has already dissolved. Today, we begin our study of the history of failure by examining the first, most crucial flaw, political paralysis. This is the disease where the organs of state, the government, the Senate, the court, become so consumed by internal fighting, corruption, and self-interest that they lose the ability to govern, to adapt, or even to see the true threats gathering outside. It is the moment the elite forget that their privilege is dependent on the stability of the entire structure. When a ruling class chooses to enrich itself at the expense of its own people, the clock of collapse begins ticking. This is the rot that begins from the gold-plated crown and spreads downward, turning the core strength of an empire into dust. The prime architect of internal decay is invariably the powerful concentration of wealth and land, the rise of the oligarchy. An oligarchy is ruled by the few, and its ultimate goal is not the nation's survival, but the relentless protection and expansion of its own riches. The late Roman Republic and a nascent empire provide a stark, terrifying blueprint for this process. As Rome conquered the Mediterranean, vast streams of wealth and millions of slaves poured back into Italy. But this wealth did not flow to the average Roman citizen or the hardworking farmer. It flowed directly to the aristocratic elite, the optimates. These elites used their political power to consolidate immense tracts of land into large, slave-run estates known as latifundia. This practice served three catastrophic purposes. First, it pushed the free Roman farmer, the very backbone of the military and the republic, off their ancestral land. Second, it created a massive, disillusioned urban underclass, the Roman mobs, who were dependent on state grain handouts and were easily swayed by populist demagogues. And third, it annihilated the tax base, as the elite used their political influence to secure massive tax exemptions. The resulting social contract was simple. The poor were crushed by taxes and poverty, and the elite faced no consequences. When reformers like the Gracchi brothers attempted to address this crisis with land redistribution, they were violently murdered by the entrenched oligarchy. This sent a chilling message. The pursuit of private wealth was more important than the stability of the state. The oligarchy trap works because it hollows out the loyalty of the common citizen. Why should a poor Roman farmer fight and die for an empire that has seized his land and left his family destitute? Once the people stop believing the system works for them, the state's moral and physical defenses evaporate. The state becomes merely a machine for wealth extraction, and the citizen becomes an enemy of the elite long before any external enemy appears on the horizon. If the oligarchy trap crushes the populace from below, the next stage of decay involves paralysis at the core. This is when the capital city, the supposed brain of the empire, ceases to function due to self-destructive infighting among the ruling factions. The later centuries of the great Han Dynasty of China are perhaps the most tragic example of this bureaucratic suicide. The Han created one of the most sophisticated, meritocratic governmental structures in history. But by the 2nd century AD, the emperor himself often became an irrelevant figurehead, paralyzed by the conflict between two extremely powerful, self-interested groups, the eunuchs and the emperor's consort families. The eunuchs were castrated male servants who often served as the emperor's closest confidants inside the Forbidden City. They controlled access to the emperor, amassed immense personal fortunes, and used their power to place their family and friends into positions of provincial governance. They represented deep-seated institutional corruption. Opposite them were the powerful families of the emperor's consorts. When a woman became empress, her brothers and male relatives were often given immense military and political power. These two factions were in constant, brutal warfare, assassinating each other, purging each other's supporters, and entirely consuming the emperor's attention. The result was a total breakdown of communication and competence. When natural disasters like the Yellow River flooding or devastating famines occurred in the provinces, the emperor was too busy surviving the power struggle in the palace to send effective aid or competent administrators. The governors who were sent were often corrupt appointees of the eunuchs, interested only in extracting wealth. This paralysis eventually fueled the disastrous Yellow Turban Rebellion. This massive peasant uprising was a direct result of the systemic failure and corruption emanating from the paralyzed capital. It was not a rebellion against the emperor as much as it was a desperate, religious-fueled cry against a political system that had become inert, incompetent, and criminally self-serving. When the heart of the state stops pumping true governance, the limbs revolt. The third stage of political failure sees the kingdom's greatest tool of preservation, its military, turn into its most dangerous internal enemy. This is the loss of loyalty, where the armed forces stop serving the state and start serving themselves, or worse, serving ambitious private warlords. Again, the Roman Empire provides the chilling archetype with its era of the barracks emperors in the 3rd century AD. As the economy crumbled from debasement, as we will explore in our next part, and frontiers became unstable, the military's power ballooned. The legions, stationed far from Rome, realized they held the true power. Emperors were no longer made by the Senate or by decree. They were simply proclaimed by legions who demanded more money, better pay, and higher rank for their generals. In a span of 50 years, Rome cycled through over 50 different emperors, most of whom were former generals who ruled briefly before being assassinated by the very troops who elevated them. The state was trapped in a self-perpetuating cycle. High taxes / debasement to pay the constantly demanding legions. Military coups, when the soldiers felt they weren't being paid enough. Civil war, factions of the army constantly fighting each other for control of the throne. The Roman military, the engine of its power, became an internal predator, consuming the empire from the inside out. All resources, money, grain, manpower, were diverted to paying off the armies, leaving nothing for public works, infrastructure, or the civil administration. The state became a hollow shell whose only function was to fund its own destruction. Similarly, in the twilight of the Han Dynasty, generals raised massive private armies to combat the Yellow Turban rebels. Once the rebellion was suppressed, these generals, men like Cao Cao and Yuan Shao, refused to disband their troops. They carved out independent territories, turning the centralized Han state into a collection of warring kingdoms. The military saved the empire from rebellion, only to chop the empire into pieces for themselves. The lesson is clear. When the instruments of protection become the source of power, the kingdom has already ended. It is now merely a collection of armed gangs fighting over the remains. We have traced the initial, fatal steps of decay. The great kingdoms of history were not brought down by the strength of their enemies, but by the weakness of their own politics. The blueprint for dust is always the same. The oligarchy trap. The elite betray the social contract, concentrating wealth and destroying the loyalty of the common people. The court paralysis. The government at the center becomes inert, consumed by internal corruption and factional warfare, rendering it incapable of responding to crisis. The loss of loyalty. The armed forces, the kingdom's final defense, turn inwards, consuming the state's resources and fighting for private gain. These 3 steps ensure that when the real, external shock arrives, be it a climate crisis, a foreign invader, or an economic crash, the civilization has no immune system left. The walls are already breached, the treasury is empty, and the citizens feel no duty to defend a corrupt, self-serving regime. The political paralysis of the ancient world is a loud, ringing warning to our own time. In the next part, we will see how this political disease weakens the empire's ability to manage its currency and resources, paving the way for the ultimate destruction, the economic lie.